Hi everyone, I'm Claire and today I'm going to show you how to stitch some lettering and give you another way of actually putting the lettering on your fabric. So we're going to be using a stencil. I'm going to show you how to create one of those, and then we're going to be using some beautiful metallic thread. Right, so how do we go about doing these letters? I'm going to show you a tip and give you an idea on what else you can do with your soldering iron. I know a lot of you have got one of these. It's a craft soldering iron with a fine tip. This is an 18-watt one, and some of you may not realise that you can actually use this as a stencil cutter, so I'll show you how to do that. Now, if you haven't got any proper stencil film at home, not to worry, I'm sure you've got some of these various poly pockets that you've got some paperwork in. Well, if you want to use a single layer of that, that will be absolutely brilliant. Now, what you need to do is decide on the lettering that you use for this project, and when you've chosen your lettering, I suggest you write your word on a piece of paper. Now, be very careful. I will just say about lettering, there are various copyright licenses that apply to typefaces and fonts in different parts of the world, so please can you just check what you use and that you're able to use it for the purpose that you want to use it. Okay, this is an ancient typeface, absolutely fine. I'm obviously based in the UK as well, so what I'm doing is going to write the lettering onto my film, and the best way is to place your film on top, tape it in place, and then using a permanent pen write your lettering on your film. Now, if you haven't got a permanent pen, the way around that is to actually place a piece of glass over your words. So something like this is great. It's a piece of clip frame glass, and I've just put tape around the edge so that you can see the edges. Now, if you were to place that over the lettering and your film on top of that, then you would be able to see through the glass and cut out your lettering okay. But I've actually written mine out, as you can see. So what I suggest you then do is you need to put this onto a heat-proof surface. So you can use a piece of glass, or I've got a heat-proof mat here, which is great, and you can place that on there. Now, what I do suggest is if you're worried about it moving around, you can tape it, but I quite like to move it so that I'm able to access cutting it out quite easily. And what you just need to do is make sure you've got your steel wool handy. I keep mine in a little metal pot like that, and you need to keep your tip of your soldering iron clean when you do this. I do also suggest that you work in a ventilated room, because as you melt through the plastic it will give off some fumes. Of course, wear a mask as well, and don't do too much lettering in any one go, and try not to lean over your work and inhale the fumes. So how I do this is just gently cut through, and I'm just cutting on the line, and you'll see it's like a knife going through butter. So I'm going to clean my end. There we are, and just put it back in a holder. And if I just lift that up, you can see that that will come away. Okay, and it's just a quick and easy way. I find it easier than cutting it out with a Stanley knife. If you don't have a soldering iron, of course you can use a sharp knife like that. But if you don't want to stencil at all, this embroidery technique is great if you've just hand painted your lettering on your fabric. But I just thought I'd show you how to cut out a stencil. So the next part is how to paint it. So what I've got here is a hard surface to work on, and I'm using some calico fabric. I just would use something that's quite smooth to do this, because you don't want the texture of your fabric to interfere with the stamping of the paint, or stenciling rather. So I'm going to put my stencil on top of your fabric. Now, because I'm going to put this fabric in a hoop, I'm mindful of where I'm positioning my lettering, and as you can see, that's going to fit perfectly all right in my hoop. So when you're happy with how you've positioned your stencil, I would actually put some masking tape in to keep it in place. So I just put that in the 4 places there. And then I'm using some fabric paint for this, and I get these from the Arty Crafty place, which is great, but if you don't have fabric paint, you can always use some acrylic paint. I just wouldn't have it too thick when you stencil it through onto the fabric, because if it's too thick, you'll find it tricky to stitch through it. So for this effect that I've done, I've used 3 different paints. So my first one is a duck egg blue, and using a sponge, I'm using a good old makeup sponge. So I'm just trying to get you to use what you've got around the house, really. So makeup sponge, and I'm just going to sponge through and do the top part of the lettering. So I'm literally going sponging it from the top. I'm not sweeping it, because if you do that, then you can get a collection of paint at the end of your stencil. So I would just sponge it like this. Okay, now I'm just using the paint that's in the lid, because I don't really want very much today. So just do that. So I thought I'd show you how to do this. I wouldn't have, here's one I made earlier, but, and you can see why it's a good idea just to tape it in place. Oops, I might have gone a bit too far with my E. So there we go. So come back. Okay. Now get another sponge, and the next colour I'm using is a teal. Oops. Which looks like this actually, which looks quite strong. If you're unsure of any colour when you get it out of the tub, what I did before I started was just to smudge it onto a bit of paper, just to remind myself what the colours look like. So that can be a quick tip if you just want to have a quick look on there. Of course, do a sample as well, and this is my sample when I sort of smudged it onto the fabric, just to give me an idea. So here we go, let's put this teal on. So just a bit of teal. There we go. The middle part of my letter. A bit more. Oh dear. I put quite a lot on there, doesn't I? Never mind, never mind. It might be a bit blobby, but it's quite good to see what not to do. There we are. I'm going to leave this in. There we go. So I just might, with the other end of that sponge, pick up some of that surplus. There we go. Don't worry, it'll be fine. And then the last colour is primary blue. I'm still liking the peacock colours that are around at the moment. So a little bit of this. Now, I thought I'd just knocked the surplus off there in the lid. Here we go, that's better. And I'm just doing the bottom of my lettering. Here we go. Just make sure I haven't got too many blobs there. There we go. Now this is that letter that's got a bit too much teal on it, so we'll just make sure that really get the blue on there. What you can do is have your paint on a plate and dab it in, but I think because I was just using a little bit of paint, I thought, oh, I'll just use it from the lid. There we go. So just go over it all again and have a look. Just put a little bit more on that bottom of my E. There we go. Now I'm quite happy with that. Now you can leave that to dry, but I know that you want to see the big reveal now, so we'll go for it. And just take your tape off. And just carefully lift it up. There we are. Okay, so that's fine. I'm going to be able to stitch over that. There's a bit of a blob over there, but that really won't show when you see the lettering with the stitching. You can see why I needed to be on a surface there that I can wipe off because it's gone through. So don't worry about that. You'll see how I cover that up, but I'm quite happy. I've got a slight smudge, I think, with the E, but again, we can tidy that up. But it's quite good to see it if it goes slightly not as planned, because I'll show you ways of getting around that. So I'll go over to the sewing machine. So I'm not at the machine yet because we need to design our curls and pop those on our letters. So here's the original lettering, and here's another version, and I've added some curls to it, and I've just drawn those in a gold pen just so that we can see. And you can see that I've got the idea of just really extending some of the lettering and working out where I'm going to put my curls. I've also tried to have a balance of size of curl and direction of curl, so we don't want them all going in the same way. And then when you look at it overall, try to make sure that it's balanced, and you can see here that I've got two curls going towards the end, but they're not coming any lower down. One isn't lower than the other, so they're quite balanced. But I quite like the variety of the curls and the fact that they aren't all incredibly even. So I've done that, and what we need to do now is to put that actually onto the design. And if you place your calico over your drawn design, it's great because you can actually see through the calico to put your curls on. So what have I marked it with? Well, I've used one of these friction pens, which is a pen that is great for doing Sudoku and crosswords because you can actually rub it out. And people have discovered that they're great for textiles because if you draw on fabric, it's perfect and disappears with an iron. The downside is that the lines can come back in the cold. So you do need to be mindful of that whenever you use them in your work. And I know that you're going to be really precise, aren't you? You're going to stitch over these curls, so it doesn't matter if the lines come back because the thread will be on top of it and you won't see it. So I've done that. And there are a couple of areas. When you look at the original lettering, you can see some fine detail here and around the R that didn't come through, or I wasn't able to stencil. So I've also just marked those in on my friction pen. Now that's the thing to do when you're cutting out a stencil, is always to be mindful about the parts that you're cutting out. For example, if I hadn't been careful, I could have easily just thought, oh yeah, line, carried on, and I would have cut that whole piece out. I just needed to cut that bit out so that the paint came through, but I've marked the rest of it there so that the R is shaped. So we're ready there now, and we're going to pop that in a hoop. Now the reason I'm putting it in a hoop is because if I put that over to the machine and went to put it underneath to do some free machine embroidery, because the fabric is quite flimsy, I would spend so much time keeping it flat that I would be unable to move it freely under the machine. By putting it in a hoop, it keeps the fabric nice and tight, and it just makes manoeuvring it really nice and easy. Now I know I'm really fond of using hoops. I know not everybody likes using a hoop, but I find they're my friend and I use them quite a lot. But of course, if you thought, oh no, I want to put some backing, I want to iron some stabilizer on, you could do that. And once it was more substantial, you'd be able to put it under your sewing machine without having to put it in a hoop. So that's something that you can do. Of course, you may not have actually stenciled your lettering on at all. So you might be just looking at this and thinking, okay, Claire, I've just written my name. I've done a signature. I've done it with paint. That's great. You might want to just extend some curls. And now this next stitching technique will be brilliant for you to get some ideas of what to do. Now, to put it in a hoop, I'm just using a good old-fashioned wooden embroidery hoop. I know that there's metal hoops that sort of are spring-loaded. Now, some are okay, some aren't very tight. So, you know, I get on much better with a lot of wooden hoops, but I know they vary. And this is a pretty standard size there, so it's going to go underneath my machine quite easily. So the way that I put it in the hoop is I look at my ring here and slacken the screw so that my inner hoop flips out. So remove that, and I'm right-handed, so I've got the screw this side. Okay, makes it easy for tightening up rather. If you were left-handed, you'd have it that way around. So I'm right-handed, perfect. So what you then need to do is to put your piece of work over your outer ring, making sure that you've got enough space around so that you can sew, because we don't want the machine embroidery foot to be hitting the edges of the hoop. So when you're happy with the position, put your inner hoop in and push that down all the way to the bottom. So let me just push that in. So push it in all the way. Okay, and then what I do then to make sure that the fabric's nice and tight, I hold on to my inner ring and I pull my fabric up at right angles. So that's right angles with the hoop. Okay, so I pull it like that. Now, I know sometimes people pull it like that, just pull it that way, but what can happen is your inner hoop can flip out. So we don't want any flipping inner hoops, do we now? So just go around, pull that up and go all the way around. And when that's nice and tight, you just need to tighten up the screw. So you can use a screwdriver or just use your hands, oops, to tighten that. There we go. So we're all ready now to do some sewing, and we're going to be able to turn it into one of these. So I just want you to have a little look. We've got some nice gold thread going on there, and you can see the design of the machine embroidery. There we are. So just turns into something different, doesn't it, really? So let's go and get the machine all ready. So there's lots of different metallic threads available out there, and I know it can be a bit confusing. I'm a great fan of Madeira threads, but I know there's other brands out there, so have a look round. But you do really need to look for a brand of metallic thread, because sometimes when you see a metallic thread and it's a really, really cheap price and you think, gosh, that's too good to be true, then I'm afraid it is, because it probably won't be suitable for actually machine embroidering. So when you actually buy metallic thread, for example on Madeira, you've got a really handy little symbol on here that tells you that it's suitable for machine embroidery. Now, I know when I used to shop for metallic threads, one of the things I used to do was to always avoid ones that had lots of different filaments with it. Now, I've got more brave with experience, and I find that these do sew perfectly all right. One thing to consider is just don't sew too quickly. But we've got this kind of variety, which is very sparkly. We've got this one here, which has got a couple of colours in it. But the thread that I'm going to use today is just a good old-fashioned gold thread. So that's the one I'm using, which is Madeira 40, metallic 40. So I think I've got a different shade of gold up there already threaded in my machine, but I just thought I'd show you the different kinds of metallic thread there. So we'll just get our piece of work underneath. So I've got my teeth dropped and my free machine embroidery foot on. Now, I know different brands look slightly different to this one. This is a Benina foot 24, but they all look different. But you do need to get the one that is appropriate for your machine. So let's get right in, because I want you to be able to see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going to start on this C. So I'm not going to do the whole thing in front of you, but I will sew one letter. So let's go for it. Now what I'm going to do is start at the end of the curl. Now on this machine, I need to lower my foot before I bring my bobbin thread up. And I hear you thinking, what's she got in the bobbin? What's she got in the bobbin? Right, well, I've got a polyester bobbin fill in the bobbin. Now you might think, well, why have you got polyester? You always tell us to have the same thing top and bottom. Now the thing with a bobbin fill is it's a much finer thread. So the metallic is what we call metallic 40, so that's a size 40 thread, but bobbin fills can be 60, 70, and the higher the number, the finer the thread. And when you use a bobbin fill, the advantage is you get far more on your bobbin, and in a piece of work like this, the underneath is not going to show, so it's perfectly all right to have bobbin fill underneath. When you look at a t-shirt perhaps that you've had that's embroidered, when you flip it over, the underneath will either be white or black, and that will indicate that it's stitched in bobbin fill. Anyway, so I've got my metallic thread in the top, I've got my bobbin fill on my bobbin, and on my machine I have slackened the tension. Now the tension is something that you don't automatically have to slacken, but you do on some machines. Now I can't tell you what setting for your machine. All machines vary, and some machines you really don't need to touch the tension. So I don't want you to think you have to slacken the tension. Some threads, when you read them, they tell you to set your tension to 0. Well, I'm afraid I don't do that, because I do consider that you do need to have some tension running through the top of your machine for it to sew properly. So I've just slackened mine tension. But I do suggest that you do a sample. Have a little play. Then you'll know. If you do a little sample like this, you'll see how it works and whether you need to slacken the top tension. And the reason you need to slacken the top tension sometimes is it pulls and you can see your bobbin thread. So you can see when I started out, that's what was happening. But when I slackened my top tension, you can see that I'm not bringing up my bobbin thread, and that's stitched perfectly all right. Now again, needles. What needle have I got? I've got a normal size 80 needle in here. Originally my machine had a size 90 top stitch needle, but it actually was making 2 big holes in the fabric, so I've gone to an 80, which is perfectly all right because this is a single layer of fabric and I'm not going to go too quickly. I think the thing is, sometimes we can sew too quickly when we sew with metallic thread, and we don't give the machine time to stitch, or we're going so fast that it's almost like rubbing 2 sticks together to create fire, and that's why it snaps. Because if you think about it, you've got a metal needle, metallic thread, you don't really want to go too fast. And when I've taught people, that's the one thing I see, is sometimes we go too quickly. Now I know we say fast foot, slow hand, so that you get that lovely smoothness, but there are times when you are slowing down for detail, and you'll see me in a moment slow quite slowly, stitch quite slowly, and you'll see that I'm not moving my hoop very much. So you just need to get the balance right, and it's a good idea to have a little play. So if I start at the end of my curl, so with this machine I've actually got to put the foot down before it lets me put the needle in, needle out. Now this is a new machine to me, so I'm not used to that feature, so I have to do that. So needle in, needle out, and bring your bobbin thread up. I know it's very short, but it's a good idea to do that, and then pop your needle back in. My presser foot is already lowered, and then off we go. It's really easy to forget to lower your presser foot on some machines because your machine embroidery foot is just bobbing along. It doesn't grab the fabric in the same way as a conventional foot. So sometimes when we see it up, we're not alarmed. We think, oh, it's fine, because it is like that. But it might be that you haven't lowered the presser foot. And if you don't lower the presser foot, the thread will get tangled and you get a bit of a bird's nest underneath. So if you're sewing along and it suddenly stops and you turn it over and there's a great mess underneath, it probably means that you've forgotten to lower the presser foot. And I still forget to lower the presser foot even now after all these years, so it's easy done. Right, off we go. So I'm going to start now. I just sew, and when you've done a few stitches you can cut your ends off. We're going to be coming back to this, so that'll be fine. So what I'm going to do is sew my curl. Now at the moment that black pen is sort of predominating, but when we iron it you'll see the beautiful gold thread. So we're coming to the C, and what I'm going to do is go around the edge. Now you can hear I'm not going too fast, and that's because I'm moving my hoop ever so slowly. Okay, so I've gone around the outside edge, And then I'm just going to do a few little wiggles on the inside of that. Then I'm coming down and I'm off to the next piece, sewing round the outside edge, and then again, just gently do some wiggles. Doesn't matter what you do really. Then you come round here. Now, what can be easier is if you actually turn your work so that it's facing you. Now, my hoop is hitting my machine, so I can do it that way if I'm sewing away from me. But that's the beauty of machine embroidery. You can sew in any direction. Now, I'm going to come around here. I'm going to go over my curl, and I'm going to stitch over my curl for a second time. And I'm then coming around the outside edge of my C. So I'm right on that edge. So you know I was talking about any smudges or any wobbles. You'll cover those up with the stitching. And then when you've done that, I would just make your way down the letter, sort of in a wavy fashion, and then meander back. It doesn't really matter, just a few little gentle wiggles, and then make your way to the beginning. And if you sew over your curl, there we are, we're done. So if I take that out, and you can have a look and see how it's, oops, actually if I just leave it there, you can, I think you can see how it's looking. And then you just carry on with the whole of the lettering. But already, doesn't it look that much smarter with a few stitches on it? We'll get that wobble covered up as well. Brilliant. So I'll carry on sewing and we'll come back. So here we are. You can see I've finished and I've managed to cover up some of those imperfections with the stitching. I've also ironed it, which gets rid of the friction pen, and heat fixes the fabric paint. So it's all ready. You can do some beading, turn it into whatever you like. Another little tip for you to clean your stencil really easily, I use a toothbrush. It saves too much rubbing and damaging the stencil. So there we are. So thank you. If you've enjoyed the video, please remember to give it the thumbs up, and please subscribe, and you'll see plenty more videos like this coming along. And if you've got any questions, pop them in the comments below and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. Thank you.